Hello, everybody. It's morning here, so I'm going to say good morning or Shabbat Shalom, or I know we saw some people in Australia and from people from all over. I'm really excited to be here. As Julie said, I'm a teacher and a consultant. I do a variety of things these days. I just moved to the DC area. I live in Silver Spring now, but I just moved from Pittsburgh. And excited to be here and to see some familiar faces and lots of new ones. We're going to jump right in, and I'm going to share my screen with slides. That was the best way for me. But what I'm going to do is, for those of you who want spoilers, I put my source sheet in the chat. But just know that if you read the source sheet, you're going to get the spoilers. So, you know, make good choices. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to invite you to share the best advice you've ever received in the chat. So just take a moment and in the chat, write out the best advice you've ever received. What is the best advice you've ever received? That was a tough question, I know. I think in a very timely way, my mom's on this call, one of my teachers, and it's not quite advice, but she continues to say, she said it to me this week, you know, we're lucky as Jews, we get more than one new year, which is always very timely this time of year. So I always find that to be good advice as well. Good something to keep in mind. Listen to your heart. Don't lie. Live in the moment. Be true to yourself. Every wind that blows is not a storm. Ooh, I like that. I like that. Do what is right. This is good advice. Put a canvas bag on the door that when you go out so that everything you need will be ready to go in the car. Snacks, mail, hat, water. I like that. Good preparation. Think of other people first. If there is no wind, row. Remain faithful. These are great pieces of advice. As you know, this is one of the last portions of the year. And as we're sort of in the midst of this new year feeling, the Jewish year is starting over. We're in 5782 now. Things are coming to an end. It's not quite over. We're sort of in this middle space. And that sort of ending, beginning is very timely for the way this parsha begins, which is with Moses' sense of conclusion. This is the second verse of this week's parsha. Right? Moses said to them, I am now 120 years old. I can no longer be active. And the literal translation is there is to come and go. I can no longer, moreover, the Lord has said to me, you shall not go across yonder Jordan. I don't know that I've used yonder very often, but it's there. Right? You will not cross this Jordan. Moses is clearly this is an ending for him. I'm 120 years old. I can't do what I did before. I can't come and go. I'm no longer active the way that I was. And, you know, he's reached the end of what he's capable of. There's a sense of self-awareness. But I also feel like there's a sense of pain in there. He's got some regrets. He's holding on to that. We know at the beginning of the Book of Deuteronomy, he's pleading with God, please let me into the land. It's not going to be me now, but please let me into the land. So there's a sense of emotion and pain and pleading, hurt, and it's not quite here on the surface, but we know that it's underneath. He's become resigned to his situation. And then we have this text from the Gemara which comments on this verse. And I'd love to get a volunteer. You can use the raised hand function to read this for us from this tractate of Sota. Yeah, Tanya, go for it.
Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nahami says that Rabbi Jonathan says the verse means that he could no longer go out and come in with words of Torah. This teaches that the gates of wisdom were closed off to him.
Thank you, Tanya. Right, so commenting on this phrase from this verse right here, I don't know if people can see my mouse, it says, Letzeit v'lavo, right? Moses says, I can't come and go. And so what the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Nachmani and Rabbi Yonatan says he couldn't come and go and bring words of Torah the way that he could before. And then this image, right, that the gates of wisdom were closed off to him. Now I got to tell you, that last line sort of irks me a little. Right? Like Moses doesn't have access to wisdom. Like what does that even mean? Like what does that mean for Moshe Rabbeinu? And I think for me, this talks to a shift. Something has shifted, whether it's a sense of wisdom that he had before that he no longer has, that he can't shift his thinking. He's not as creative as he was before. Something has changed. And we know he's resigned himself to the situation. And so what does he do with this status of not being able to come and go? He encourages the people and he empowers Joshua. Right, this is the next verse. The Lord, I'll love a volunteer to read this for us. Can I get another volunteer, somebody to raise their hand, the raised hand function? It's under participants or more. I forget where it is these days. Great, Nina.
The Lord your God, God's self, will cross over before you, and God's self will wipe out those nations from your path, and you shall dispossess them. Joshua is the one who shall cross before you, as the Lord has spoken.
Great. So we have Moses here, who is telling himself, telling the people, I'm not going in the land with you, but you are going into the land, and God is going to prepare the way for you, and Joshua is going to be the one who's going to go with you. You're going to be okay. And so what ends up happening right after this, as the tone starts to shift, is that Moses begins to give the people and to Joshua advice on how to move forward. What is this next? What are you going to do once you get into the land? Right? It's not the whole speech with all the laws. It's about advice. And so I'd love for you to put in the chat. You can raise your hand. If you were Moses and you were going and you were sending Joshua into the land with the people, what advice would you give Joshua and the people? Right? So it's not the same as maybe advice you would take for yourself, but what advice would you give to Moses, to Joshua and the people if you were Moses? You can put it in the chat. You can raise your hand. I'd love to hear what you think. What do people think? What advice would you give? Never lose focus on Hashem, from Richard. Stay away from those pagan women, from Tanya. Certainly one approach. Be strong and be of good courage. Someone's reading spoilers. Believe and follow God. Delegate, right? Classic from Parashat Yitro. Listen to God and do not listen to the whining of the people, right? As Jews, I'm not sure that we can really not listen to the whining. Be vigilant, be kind, be faithful, be patient. Don't be afraid. Don't mess this up. Follow God's instructions and your leaders. This is great advice. Great advice. Communicate with your people, right? There's a theme to these things, which is you got to be strong in here, right? We got to be strong in our heart, in our soul. We need to be. We need to remember, right? There was follow God's instructions. Don't forget the commandments. Be vigilant. It's a lot of memory and heart and holding this stuff in the heart. What Moses does, he does in two different versions. And he says it sort of to himself and then to Joshua and the people. And he says the following. Oh, I had a prompt. I had it written on there, but now you can see what I wrote. Here is what Moses says. Can everybody read this? If you can see it, give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Can I get a volunteer to read what Moses says to Joshua and to the people? Yeah, Don DeRose. I see you waving there. Oh, we still can't hear you. There you go.
Okay. Be strong and resolute. Be not in fear or in dread of them. For the Lord your God himself, marches with you. God will not fail you or forsake you. Then Moses called Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and resolute, for it is you who shall go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them. And it is you who shall apportion it to them. And the Lord God itself, and the Lord God's self will go before you. God will be with you. God will not fail you or forsake you. Fear not and be not dismayed.
Awesome. Thank you, Don. So we hear that we get this sort of advice, this encouragement, this empowerment from Moses in two different versions, right? Be strong and resolute. Don't fear. God's going to be with you. God's not going to fail you, not forsake you, not going to abandon you, right? That's part 1. That's verse 6. And then we see it repeated slightly differently in verses 7 and 8. Moses called to Joshua, said to them, be in the sight of all Israel, be strong and resolute. We saw that before, right? And then, it's going to be you going in. And then verse 8, God's going to go with you. God, don't be afraid. God's not going to abandon you. So we've got this repetition, and we know that when the Torah repeats something, we should be paying attention. These are strong reminders for us to be faithful, to be strong in our hearts, resolute, right? Chazak va'amatz, right, are the two words. You can see them here. Chizku v'imtzu, right? Chazak ve'ematz, right? Those are the words we're seeing. That's what we want us to feel. That's what Moses is encouraging Joshua and the people to feel in these moments. Does this make you feel encouraged? Right? If you were the people and Moses said this to you, how would this make you feel? You can put it in the chat. You can raise your hand. Would this work for you? Does this make you feel ready to enter the land? Probably not. Thank you, Franna. Right? Scared. Right? There's a lot coming up. And if someone who says to you, don't be afraid, there's probably a good reason to be afraid, right? If this is an antidote for the situation with the spies, right? So certainly we could be calling back to all of the fear ground up with the spies, right? Phyllis and Warren say a lot of responsibility. That's exactly right. And here's the thing. If we take this at face value, God's going to be with us. Let's be strong. We can be faithful. This is very much in resonance with the promises that we've seen from God throughout the Torah many times before, except God does and says exactly the opposite. If we go down to later on in the Parsha, this is what God says. And I'd love a volunteer to read this, but I want them to read it with a very serious, intense tone. So I'd love for you to volunteer to read. And if that's you, I want to hear the intensity. So I want to volunteer. Lois, was that you waving your hand? Yeah. Okay, Lois. I'd love for you to read, but I want you to read it like an angry God.
I'm not sure I can do that.
I believe it.
The Lord said to Moses, you are soon to lie with your ancestors. This people will thereupon go astray after the alien gods in their midst, in the land that they are about to enter. They will forsake me and break my covenant that I made with them. Then my anger will flare up against them, and I will abandon them and hide my countenance from them. They shall be ready prey, and many evils and troubles shall befall them. And they shall say on that day, surely it is because our God is not in our midst that these evils have befallen us.
Awesome, thank you. I thought your angry God voice was perfect.
I just want to add,
Please.
I live in Montgomery County. You know, right, you said you live in Silver Spring. I'm in Bethesda, just next to Silver Spring.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, a landsman here in the DC area. Thank you, Lois. So Moses says to the people, God's not going to abandon you. And then not 10 verses later, God says, I'm going to abandon them. They're going to break the rules and I'm going to abandon them. I saw Elisheva, I saw you raise your hand before. I'd love for you to read this next part, just a few verses later. This is what God continues to say. Angry God voice, Elisheva.
When I bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey that I promised on oath to their ancestors, and they eat their fill and grow fat and turn to other gods and serve them, spurning me and breaking my covenant, and the many evils and troubles befall them, then this poem shall confront them as a witness, since it will never be lost from the mouth of their offspring. I have to wait for the chat to disappear.
Is that covering up the picture?
It's covering the text. Okay. For I know what plans they are devising even now, before I bring them into the land that I promised on oath.
Right. So Moses says to the people, don't worry. God's going to be with you. And God comes back and says, these people are going to break the rules. I'm going to abandon them. I'm going to make them, they're going to be punished. I'm going to hide my countenance. They're going to have evils and troubles. And there's going to be this poem that's witnessed, which is Parashat Hazinu, the next one, right? They're never going to forget the fact that I'm punishing them. And in fact, in this Parsha, Moses says, I didn't add it here. Moses says, I'm going to die. And I know that you've been bad while I've been alive. I know how bad you're going to be when I'm not around. And so for me, there's a problem here. Moses says, God's not going to abandon you, but God abandons you. Right? That's a conflict for me. That needs resolution in some way. This is serious punishment stuff. And so we might want to unpack a little bit. What does this mean? And I want to highlight this one phrase here, evils and troubles. Right? Ra'ot, rabot, v'tzarot. Right? What does that actually mean? What is it that God is saying when God's going to abandon us? What does that really mean? What is that frustration, that suffering going to look like? And we have the wisdom of the Gemara to answer that question for us. Can I get another volunteer? There are 3 parts of this Chagiga text, so I'd love to have 3 volunteers read. If you want to use the raised hand function, that'd be great. Bob has added hardships. I think that's certainly going to be part of it. Great. Sheila, I'd love for you to read first, and then I'll have 2 more volunteers. Great. Suzanne, you're going to be next. 1 more would be great. While we wait for that 1 more person, Sheila, why don't you start reading for us what the Chagiga says?
The Gemara asks, what is the verse referring to when it states evils and troubles? Rav said, evils that become troubles for one another, i.e., the remedy of one problem has a deleterious effect on the other.
Awesome, thank you. Right, so what does evils and troubles mean? Evils become troubles for one another, which means that we have 2 things wrong, and that the solution to each one of them is bad for the other one, right? And we're going to get an example. I forgot who the other person who had their hand up was. I think it was Suzanne. I'd love for you to read what comes next, if you want to raise your hand again.
For example, one who is stung by a hornet and a scorpion The sting of a hornet must be treated only with a cold ointment, while that of a scorpion must be treated with a hot ointment. As these medicaments are mutually exclusive, one cannot treat both stings at the same time.
Awesome. Thank you. Right, so here we have this example. What does evils and troubles mean? What is this stuff that God is going to allow to happen to the people? That you're going to have two types of pain, and they're not going to work to heal them both. Now, I have a friend who is a toxicology doctor. I did not ask him about a hornet and a scorpion, but we certainly know that there are things in life and medications, my wife's a physician, that medications can conflict with one another. We have these challenges that the problems overlap here, right? So one potential understanding is that the evils and troubles is we're gonna create problems that the solutions are problems for something else. And living in the modern world, I think we can get a sense of what that might look like. Can I get one more volunteer to read another possible understanding of evils and troubles? Can I get one more volunteer? I see Robert waving into the Robert Epstein waving into the camera. Oh, hold on! I didn't change the slide.
For example, as Shmuel said, this verse is referring to one who provides money to a poor person as a loan during his exigent financial circumstances, but immediately after the borrower was released from the initial pressure by receiving the loan, the lender begins to demand repayment, subjecting the recipient to further pressure. Rabbi said that this explains the folk saying that people say, a dinar for produce is not found, for hanging it can be found. A poor person cannot find money to buy basic necessities. However, when the lenders hang on and pressure him, he must come up with the money somehow.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert. So here's an alternative or something related, which is this verse about evils and troubles has to do with someone who lends money to a poor person when they are struggling, but then creates a new problem by forcing that person to pay back that loan quicker. Right, so imagine, right, I needed groceries, I got lent $100, and so I'm able to buy the groceries, but then the next day someone says, hey, where's my $100 to pay me back? There's a whole new set of pressures from the person who's giving the loan when that person didn't have money in the first place, right? That they're already in challenging financial straits. And Rava gives this another example, right? Or a similar example, right? Which is, can't find money for groceries, right? But someone who's going to put pressure on you, you got to find a way to pay him somehow, right? That we're creating a scenario, a situation, a society in which we are putting pressure on one another financially, in emotional stress. That this is how the Gemara defines evil and troubles. However, this is a strange example. We're talking about entering the land. We're talking about faithfulness. This feels like a strange outlier. Like, why this? And this is why I didn't want you to look at the source sheet for spoilers. This portion also has the rules for the Shemitah year. Now, of course, the Shemitah year is a series of laws that instruct the people to remit debts and famously allow the land to lie fallow. It's a 7-year cycle, which we're going to see here in a second in Deuteronomy. And it happens to start, the cycle begins in just a few weeks. So definitely can't let it go without being mentioned. So we have this whole thing. Moses says to the people, God's not going to abandon you. God then comes back and says, they're not going to follow the rules and I'm going to abandon them. And in the middle is this section about Shemitah. It's very strange why Shemitah might live here in the middle. Like, why here? Why at the end of the Torah are we getting these few lines about Shemitah? So I'm gonna read it here, and we'll start to unpack it. And Moses instructed them as follows. Every 7th year, the year set for Shemitah, at the festival of Sukkot, right? That's when you should, that's when it begins, which happens this Sukkot. When all of Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God in the place that God will choose. You shall read this teaching aloud in the presence of all Israel. Gather the people, men, women, children, the strangers in your communities, that they may hear and so learn to revere the Lord your God and observe faithfully every word of this teaching. Their children too, who have not had the experience, shall hear and learn to revere the Lord your God as long as they live in the land that you are about to cross the Jordan to possess. It's clear how absolutely essential it is that this teaching is done in public. Right? This is the time when everybody gathers, right? Sukkot is one of the 3 harvest festivals, the pilgrimage festivals. People are coming into Jerusalem, although not yet, narratively in the Torah. You're going to gather everybody up. Doesn't matter who they are. If they're locals, they're not locals. It doesn't matter their gender or however old they are. Everybody's going to gather so that we can learn this thing, which is shemitah. It's strange. It's really strange that this would be here amongst this faithfulness. Now, I think, I'm going to turn off the share for a moment so I can see all of your faces. I think that this text in the Chagiga about the way we treat one another, in particular, this was an example around loans. You know, we're talking about principles, right? We're talking about money and debts, yes, certainly, but we're talking about principles and mindset. It's about how culture is created, right? The text in Chagiga is on some level about cruelty, right? We're talking about a world in which people can't find money for what they need, that they're the people who are there presumably to help them are putting pressure on them, right? That's not quite the world we want to live in. That's not the principles we want to set forward. But I want to pull back. And, you know, I don't have any land that I lie fallow. I don't have a farm in which I am not growing things. I might donate money, but I'm not giving a lot of loans. So we might ask ourselves, what are the loans that we give for ourselves? Maybe not financial loans. What debts do we have on our souls that we're holding on to? Right? We talked about Moses's debts, this resentment about not being allowed into the land. He might be settled in it at the end, but he's holding that still. Some frustration about it. Those, you know, we each of us carry these debts of anger, frustration, resentment, hatred, grudges. And I think this is why this text shows up between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And especially this year with the Shemitah starting in a few years, we can hold on to this, that there is so much to learn from this dynamic. And I think what God is doing in this text is warning us, what the Torah is doing is warning us against, right, serving other gods, the gods of these debts, these grudges, these resentments. That if you hold on to these things, you will no longer be acting faithfully with God. That you will live in anger and not in kindness, that you live in greed but not generosity, that you live in resentment and not forgiveness. Right? Those become the gods that you serve instead of something that might be more healing and fulfilling. And so what we can do instead is go back to the advice that Moses gave us, to be strong, to resist fear, to be resolute, to be faithful, to hold those things instead of the evils and troubles that might strike us. So I want to offer it for a moment. Just take a moment, maybe if it's helpful to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and think about whatever spiritual or emotional debt you might be holding on to in this moment. Just take a moment and breathe it in, whatever your situation is. We'll just take like 10 or 15 seconds of silence together. I think the lesson is that we should turn these debts into credits. that the merits, the credits, the positivity, the optimism that can be the strength and resoluteness, the faithfulness in response to that evil and troubles, those debts that we hold. And so I want to encourage you for a moment to think about what the opposite of your debt is and share that in the chat. Let's fill this Zoom with chazak and amatz, with strength and resoluteness, with faithfulness, with kindness. And so just take a moment. Think about what your debt is, what the opposite of it might be, the inverse of it. And let's offer that wisdom, that advice, that kindness to everyone else who's here. Just take a moment. As my mother very wisely put in the chat, one of the lessons we've learned from one of my teachers, something we talk about a lot: when in doubt, love more. One of my favorite things. Thanks, Mom. Gratitude, self-respect. Patience, empathy, respect and kindness, regardless of who the person is, more love towards others. See the goodness in people, forgiveness, faith. To actually love yourself. These are powerful merits. These are powerful credits. These are things that can make a difference. And in that personal debt that we can hold this year, as we explore shemitah, as I'm sure you will hear a million times this upcoming year, this can be part of the way that you live that out. In addition to all the other ways that you might do so to hold this in. Resilience, individuation, see God in every person you encounter, you meet. Right? As Frana put, some things that are ecological in nature, something more very literal to shemitah, commitment. Remember that others are created in the image of the divine. And so I want to thank you all for our time here together, for learning with me today and sharing your wisdom and your kindness and your advice as if you were Moshe. And I hope all of you have a wonderful Shabbat if you're in it, and Shabbat to be if you're not yet in it. Thanks, everybody.